I stood in my own driveway, staring at the impossible. My garage door was closed, but I could hear an engine running inside. My hands shook as I pressed the remote. The door rolled up slowly, revealing something that made my blood freeze. A gleaming white SUV sat parked in my garage. Not just any SUV. Karen Henderson's SUV. The same woman who had terrorized our neighborhood for 3 years as HOA president. The same woman who fined people for leaving trash cans out 5 minutes too long. She was sitting in the driver's seat, scrolling through her phone like she owned the place. When she saw me standing there, she did not even look surprised. She just rolled down her window and smiled that cold, entitled smile I had grown to hate. That moment changed everything. Because what Karen did not know was that I had just booked a week-long business trip, and I was about to teach her the most expensive parking lesson of her life. Tuesday evening started like any other. I pulled into my driveway after another long day at the office, my mind already shifting to dinner plans and catching up on emails. I had lived in Maple Grove Estates for 5 years, and this routine had become as natural as breathing. But something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my car. The automatic garage light was on, glowing through the small windows. I always turned it off when I left for work. Always. My first thought was that maybe I had forgotten. Stress at work had been building lately, and small details sometimes slipped through the cracks. I grabbed my garage door remote from the center console and pressed the button, expecting to see my empty garage and my workbench exactly where I left them. The door rolled up with its familiar mechanical hum. What I saw inside made me question my own sanity. A white Cadillac Escalade sat perfectly centered in my single-car garage. The engine was running and someone was behind the wheel. For a split second, I wondered if I had pulled into the wrong driveway. But there was my workbench. There were my tools hanging on the pegboard. There was the oil stain on the concrete floor from my old Honda. This was definitely my garage. The driver's side window rolled down and Karen Henderson's face appeared. She looked at me with the same expression she wore during HOA meetings when someone dared to question her authority. Calm, controlled, completely unbothered. "Karen," I called out, walking closer to the garage. "What are you doing in my garage?" She turned off her engine and stepped out of the SUV like she owned the place. Her designer handbag hung from her shoulder, and her perfectly styled blonde hair did not have a strand out of place. Even in my garage, she looked like she was heading to a country club luncheon. "Oh, hello there," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I was just taking advantage of the emergency parking provision in Section 12 of the HOA bylaws. You probably have not read them recently." I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. Emergency parking provision. In my private garage. "Karen, this is my garage, my private garage. You cannot just park here." She laughed, the kind of laugh that made my skin crawl. It was the same laugh she used when she explained to neighbors why their mailboxes were the wrong shade of black, or why their holiday decorations violated community standards. "Actually, I can. The HOA has certain rights during parking emergencies, and my driveway is being power washed tomorrow morning. I need somewhere secure to keep my vehicle overnight." She said it like she was explaining basic math to a child, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You have a 2-car driveway," I said, my voice rising. "Park on the street like everyone else." "The street is not secure enough for a vehicle of this value," she replied, patting the hood of her Escalade. "Besides, the emergency provision clearly states that any HOA member can use available covered parking during maintenance emergencies." I felt my face getting hot. This woman had been making our lives miserable for 3 years, and now she was standing in my garage, acting like she had every right to be there. "Get out," I said firmly. "Get your car out of my garage right now, or I am calling the police." Karen's expression changed. The fake sweetness disappeared, replaced by the cold authority I had seen her use to intimidate dozens of neighbors over the years. "You will do no such thing," she said, stepping closer to me. "If you harass me or interfere with my lawful use of this space, I will file a complaint with the sheriff's department for disturbing the peace. I will also recommend that the HOA pursue legal action against you for violation of community agreements." She climbed back into her SUV and rolled up the window, dismissing me like I was nothing more than an annoying interruption to her day. I stood there in stunned silence, watching her browse through her phone like nothing had happened. In 5 years of living here, I had never felt so violated, so powerless in my own home. That night I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Corinne's smug face and heard her condescending voice explaining why she had the right to take over my private property. But as I lay there in the dark, a plan began to form. A plan that would teach Corinne Henderson that some people do not back down as easily as she thought. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I had more important things to do than sit through marketing meetings while Corinne Henderson made herself comfortable in my garage. When I checked on her at 7 a.m., she was gone, but there was a manila folder sitting on my workbench with a yellow sticky note attached. In Corinne's precise handwriting, it read, "For your reference, KH." Inside the folder were 23 pages of HOA documents, printed on official letterhead. Most of it was standard language about community standards and architectural guidelines, but highlighted in bright yellow marker was Section 12, subsection C, Emergency Parking Provisions. I read it 3 times before the full scope of Corinne's manipulation became clear. The provision allowed HOA board members to designate temporary parking solutions during infrastructure emergencies that affected homeowner driveways or garages. It was clearly written to handle situations like burst water pipes or gas leaks that might require residents to move their vehicles quickly. But Corinne had twisted the language to serve her own purposes. According to her interpretation, any maintenance activity qualified as an infrastructure emergency. Power washing her driveway apparently gave her the authority to commandeer my garage. The most disturbing part was the signature line at the bottom of the provision. It had been added recently, sometime in the past 6 months. The document was signed by Corinne Henderson as HOA president, with no countersignature from other board members. She had essentially given herself the power to take over any garage or driveway in the community, whenever she felt like it. I spent the morning calling other neighbors, starting with the ones I knew had been targeted by Corinne's harassment campaigns over the years. What I discovered made my blood boil. Mrs. Chen from Oak Street told me that Corinne had parked her boat trailer in Mrs. Chen's driveway for 2 weeks last summer, claiming a drainage emergency that no one else could see. When Mrs. Chen complained, Corinne threatened to fine her for having an unlicensed vehicle on her property. The Johnsons from Maple Avenue had a similar story. Corinne had used their garage to store HOA maintenance equipment while her own garage was being organized. The emergency lasted 3 weeks, and they were afraid to complain because Corinne had already fined them twice for minor landscaping violations. Tom Rodriguez told me the most disturbing story of all. Corinne had moved her personal items into his basement during a bogus, mold inspection of her own home. When Tom's wife objected, Karen initiated an investigation into their home business, claiming they were violating zoning restrictions by selling handmade crafts online. The pattern was clear. Karen had been systematically abusing her authority for years, using official-sounding language and legal threats to intimidate people into compliance. Around noon, I heard Karen's SUV pull into my driveway. I watched from my living room window as she used a garage door remote, to open the door and park inside like she had been doing it for years. When I confronted her, she was even more brazen than the day before. "I see you found the documentation," she said, stepping out of her Escalade with the same entitled confidence. "I trust that cleared up any confusion about my parking rights." "This is insane, Karen. You cannot just decide you own everyone's garage." "I am not deciding anything," she replied coolly. "I am following established HOA policy, which you agreed to when you purchased your home. If you have issues with community governance, you are welcome to attend the next board meeting and voice your concerns through proper channels." Before I could respond, a black pickup truck pulled into my driveway behind Karen's SUV. A tall man in a business suit got out and walked toward us with the same arrogant stride as his wife. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking at me like I was trespassing on my own property. "No problem at all," Karen said sweetly. "I was just explaining the emergency parking provision to our neighbor. Honey, this is—" She paused, pretending to search for my name. "I am sorry, I do not recall your name." "David," I said through gritted teeth. We had lived across the street from each other for 3 years. "Right, David. David, this is my husband Marcus. He is an attorney." Marcus Henderson looked me up and down like he was evaluating a potential lawsuit. "I understand my wife is utilizing your garage under the emergency provisions clause. I hope there will not be any interference with her lawful use of the space." The way he said "lawful" made it clear this was a threat. These people had turned harassment into an art form. "Your wife does not have any lawful claim to my garage," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Marcus smiled the same cold smile as his wife. "Actually, she does. And if you continue to harass her or attempt to interfere with her parking arrangements, we will be forced to explore legal remedies. Harassment of HOA officials is a serious matter, David." They both climbed into the SUV and drove away, leaving me standing in my own driveway, furious and humiliated. That afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I started with what I thought would be the easiest solution: calling the police. Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, a tired-looking man in his 40s who seemed like he had dealt with neighborhood disputes before. "So let me get this straight," he said, flipping through his notepad. "Your HOA president is parking in your garage without permission, and she claims she has the legal right to do it." "That is exactly right. She even has a key to my garage door remote somehow." Officer Martinez sighed and shook his head. "Sir, this sounds like a civil matter between you and your homeowners association. Unless she is damaging your property or threatening you directly, there is not much we can do from a criminal standpoint." "But this is trespassing. She does not have permission to be on my property." "Normally, yes. But if she has documentation from your HOA granting her access, then it becomes a contract dispute. You would need to work that out through your HOA management company or take it to civil court." He left me with a case number and a suggestion to contact a lawyer. I felt more frustrated than when I started. My next call was to Prestige Property Management, the company that handled administrative duties for our HOA. I spent 45 minutes on hold listening to elevator music before reaching a customer service representative named Jessica. "I am calling about an abuse of authority by our HOA president," I began, launching into my story about Corinne's garage takeover. "I understand your frustration," Jessica said in a tone that made it clear she did not understand anything. "However, Mrs. Henderson is the elected president of your community association, and we cannot interfere with her interpretation of community bylaws. If you disagree with her decisions, you would need to address that through your community's internal governance process." "What does that mean exactly?" "You could request a special board meeting to discuss the issue, or wait until the next scheduled meeting to voice your concerns. You could also run for the board yourself during the next election cycle." The next election was 8 months away. Corinne could park a circus in my garage by then. I tried reasoning with Corinne one more time that evening. When she arrived at my garage, I was waiting for her with a peace offering, fresh coffee, and a plate of cookies from the bakery she liked downtown. "Corinne, I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. Can we talk about this like neighbors?" She looked at the coffee and cookies like they might be poisoned. "What exactly did you want to discuss, David?" "This parking situation. I understand you need a secure place for your vehicle, but using my garage without asking feels like a violation of my privacy. Could we work out some kind of arrangement? Maybe I could help you find alternative parking, or we could set up a schedule." Corinne's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I thought I had reached her reasonable side. "David, I appreciate the gesture, but you are missing the fundamental issue here. This is not about my convenience or your feelings. This is about proper adherence to community governance structures. When residents start questioning established policies based on personal preferences, it undermines the entire system we have built here." "But you wrote that policy yourself. You added it to the bylaws without a vote." Her fake sympathy vanished instantly. "I did not write anything. I clarified existing language that was already part of our community agreements, and I did not need a vote because emergency provisions fall under executive authority granted to the HOA president." She paused, studying my face like she was deciding how much more to explain. "David, let me be very clear about something. I have been managing this community for 3 years. I have increased property values, maintained our standards, and kept this neighborhood desirable. If you want to live somewhere without rules and governance, you are welcome to move somewhere else." The conversation went downhill from there. By the time she left, she had threatened to fine me for improper landscaping and warned me that continued harassment would result in legal action. That night, I reviewed my security camera footage and discovered something that made my hands shake with anger. Corinne had been parking in my garage for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. The timestamps showed her arriving every morning at 8:15 and leaving every evening at 5:30, like she was using my garage as her personal downtown parking space. But the most infuriating discovery was how she had gotten access in the first place. The footage from 3 weeks earlier showed Corinne walking around my property while I was at work, testing different garage door remotes until she found one that worked. She had systematically tried remotes until she found the right frequency to open my door. This was not an emergency parking situation. This was calculated theft of my property, planned and executed over time. I sat in my living room that night, staring at the evidence on my laptop screen. Every legal avenue had failed. Every attempt at reasoning had been dismissed. Every authority figure had told me this was not their problem. That was when I remembered my upcoming business trip to Denver. A week-long training conference that I had been dreading because it meant missing my anniversary dinner with my wife. Suddenly, that business trip did not seem like such an inconvenience after all. I spent the next 2 days researching property law, trespassing statutes, and HOA regulations until my eyes burned from staring at legal documents. What I discovered gave me the confidence I needed to move forward with my plan. According to state property law, Karen's emergency parking provision had no legal standing whatsoever. HOA bylaws cannot override basic property rights, and no homeowners association has the authority to grant access to private garages without explicit written consent from the property owner. More importantly, Karen's method of gaining access to my garage constituted criminal trespass and theft of services. Using an unauthorized remote to enter private property was legally equivalent to picking a lock or breaking a window. But the most crucial discovery was this. As long as I did not damage her vehicle or create a safety hazard, I had every right to secure my private property in any way I chose. If someone parked illegally in my garage, I could legally prevent them from leaving until proper authorities resolved the situation. The business trip to Denver was scheduled for Monday through Friday of the following week. 5 days of mandatory training sessions for a new software platform our company was implementing. 5 days that I would be 3 states away with a rock-solid alibi and dozens of witnesses. I called my wife Sarah and explained the situation. At first, she thought I was joking. "Wait, you want to lock Karen's car in our garage while you are in Denver? David, that sounds insane." "It is perfectly legal," I said, showing her the property law documents I had printed. "She is trespassing on our property and using our garage without permission. I have every right to secure my own garage." Sarah read through the legal research, her expression shifting from concern to amazement to something that looked suspiciously like admiration. "You know what? Karen Henderson has been terrorizing this neighborhood for years. Maybe it is time someone stood up to her. The beauty of the plan is that I will not even be here when it happens. I will be sitting in conference rooms in Denver, learning about database management. I will have nothing to do with Karen's parking problems." The next phase was preparation. I installed 2 additional security cameras in my garage, positioned to capture every angle of Karen's vehicle and any attempts to remove it. I tested the cameras with my smartphone app, confirming that I could monitor the situation remotely from Denver. I also scheduled a complete garage door tune-up with Henderson Home Services. The irony of the company name was not lost on me. The technician arrived Friday morning and replaced my old mechanical lock with a new digital system that could only be opened with a 6-digit code. "This is a great system," the technician explained. "You can change the code remotely through the app, and it keeps a log of every time the door is opened or closed. Perfect for security." Perfect indeed. Saturday morning, I tested the new system multiple times. The old remote that Karen had been using no longer worked. The only way to open the garage door was with the 6-digit code that only I knew. I spent Saturday afternoon preparing my house for a week away. I arranged for mail pickup, set timers on several lights, and asked my neighbor Jim to keep an eye on things while I was gone. Jim had been complaining about Karen's HOA harassment for months, and when I explained my plan, he nearly choked on his coffee. "You are going to lock her car in your garage for a whole week." "I am going to Denver for business," I corrected him. "What happens to illegally parked vehicles while I am away is not my responsibility." Jim grinned and shook his head. "David, I have been waiting 3 years for someone to stand up to that woman. This is going to be legendary. Sunday evening, I packed my suitcase and reviewed my plan one final time. Karen typically arrived at my garage between 8 and 8:30 Monday morning. My flight to Denver departed at 6:30 a.m., giving me a perfect alibi. I changed the garage door code one final time, choosing a combination that I would never forget. The date Karen first parked in my garage without permission. That night, I barely slept. Part of me was nervous about the potential consequences, but a larger part was excited about finally taking action after weeks of feeling powerless. Around midnight, I walked outside and stood in my driveway, looking at the garage that had become the center of this neighborhood drama. In less than 8 hours, Karen Henderson would drive up to my house expecting to park in my garage like she had been doing for 3 weeks. Instead, she would discover that some people do not back down as easily as she thought. I checked my phone one more time, confirming my flight details and hotel reservations. Everything was in place. By tomorrow evening, I would be having dinner in downtown Denver while Karen dealt with the consequences of her own actions. The plan was simple, legal, and absolutely foolproof. At least that was what I thought. My flight to Denver took off at 6:30 Monday morning, right on schedule. As we climbed above the clouds, I checked my security camera app one final time before switching my phone to airplane mode. My garage was empty and secure, waiting for Karen's morning arrival. The conference hotel had decent Wi-Fi, and by the time I checked into my room at noon Mountain Time, the drama back home was already in full swing. The first notification came from my garage security camera at 8:23 a.m. Eastern. Karen's white Escalade had pulled into my driveway exactly on schedule. The camera captured her pressing the garage door remote, then pressing it again when nothing happened. I watched her get out of her vehicle and examine the garage door like it had personally betrayed her. For the next 20 minutes, Karen tried everything she could think of. She pressed the remote from different angles. She manually checked the garage door for mechanical problems. She even called someone on her phone, probably her husband or the HOA management company. At 8:47 a.m., my phone started ringing. Karen Henderson's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 5 minutes later, then a third. By 9 a.m., I had 4 missed calls and a text message that simply read, "Call me immediately. Emergency." I was sitting in the hotel restaurant, enjoying coffee and breakfast while reviewing conference materials. According to my phone, I was 1,247 miles away from my garage and completely unreachable due to flight travel. The security camera footage from Monday afternoon told the whole story. Karen had returned to my driveway at 12:30 p.m. with her husband Marcus and someone who looked like a maintenance worker. They spent an hour trying to force open my garage door with pry bars and power tools. When that failed, Marcus called the police. Officer Martinez, the same officer who had told me this was a civil matter, arrived at 2:15 p.m. The security camera captured the entire conversation, and I could read lips well enough to understand the basics. Karen was pointing at my garage door and gesturing wildly. Marcus was showing Officer Martinez some kind of paperwork, probably the fake emergency parking provision. The maintenance worker was explaining why they could not open the door without damaging it. Officer Martinez shook his head repeatedly and handed the paperwork back to Marcus. After 20 minutes of heated discussion, he left without taking any action. Karen's car was still parked in my driveway at 5 p.m. Monday evening, when I called my wife from the hotel. "Sarah, how are things at home?" "Oh, you mean aside from the circus in our driveway? Karen has been there all day. She tried calling a locksmith, but when he found out the garage belonged to someone else, he refused to help. She even called a towing company, but they told her they could not remove a vehicle from inside a closed garage." "Where is she now?" "She is sitting in her car in our driveway, making phone calls. Jim says she has been there for 3 hours straight, just sitting there like she is waiting for something to happen." Tuesday morning brought fresh drama. The security cameras showed Karen arriving at 6:30 a.m. with a folding chair, a cooler, and what looked like camping equipment. She set up a base camp in my driveway like she was planning to wait me out. The phone calls continued all day Tuesday. Karen called 16 times between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. She left voicemails that escalated from polite requests to barely contained fury. "David, this is Karen Henderson. I need you to return my call immediately regarding access to your garage. This situation needs to be resolved today." "David, this is becoming ridiculous. I have important appointments this week and I need access to my vehicle. Call me back right now." "This is harassment, David. I am documenting every minute of this illegal detention of my personal property. You will be hearing from my attorney." By Wednesday, the situation had attracted neighborhood attention. My security cameras captured neighbors walking by my house, stopping to stare at Karen's driveway campsite and taking pictures with their phones. Mrs. Chen brought Karen a thermos of coffee and spent 20 minutes talking to her. Based on their body language, Mrs. Chen was not offering sympathy. The Johnsons walked their dog past my house 4 times on Wednesday afternoon, twice their normal route. Tom Rodriguez pretended to check his mailbox while staring at Karen's setup. Thursday morning brought reinforcements. Marcus Henderson arrived with 2 men in business suits who spent an hour examining my garage door and taking photographs. One of them appeared to be a lawyer, based on the briefcase and official documents he kept referencing. The other man looked like a private investigator or security consultant. He took detailed photos of my security cameras and spent a long time on his phone, probably trying to determine my location. None of it mattered. I was 1,500 miles away, attending seminars on database architecture and networking protocols. Every night, I called Sarah from my hotel room and got updates on the Karen situation like it was my favorite television show. "She is still there," Sarah reported Thursday evening. "But Jim says people are starting to complain about her camping setup. Apparently, the HOA has rules about overnight parking in driveways, and she is violating her own policies." Friday morning, I had my final conference session on implementation strategies for enterprise software solutions. While I took notes on data migration protocols, Karen Henderson was experiencing her own kind of data migration problem 1,500 miles away. The security footage from Friday showed Karen packing up her camping equipment with sharp, angry movements. She threw the folding chair into her husband's truck like she was trying to break it. At 2:30 p.m. Friday afternoon, she made one final phone call from my driveway. This time, she left a voicemail that was less angry and more resigned. "David, this is Karen. I need to discuss this situation with you when you return from wherever you are. We need to find a reasonable solution that works for everyone involved." For the first time in 4 days, she sounded less like an entitled HOA president and more like someone who had finally realized she was not in control of the situation. My flight home was scheduled for Saturday morning. As the plane descended toward home, I checked my security cameras one final time. Karen's driveway campsite was gone. Her Escalade was nowhere to be seen. My garage door remained securely closed, exactly as I had left it. But the real surprise was waiting for me when I got home. I landed at the airport Saturday afternoon to find 17 missed calls and 42 text messages on my phone. Most were from neighbors, but several were from numbers I did not recognize. The first message I listened to was from Jim, and I could barely understand him because he was laughing so hard. "David, you have got to see what happened while you were gone. Karen tried to get the fire department to open your garage by claiming there was a gas leak. When they showed up with their equipment and could not find any gas leak, she tried to convince them that her medication was locked inside her car and it was a medical emergency." The next message was from Mrs. Chen, speaking in her careful, precise English. "David, I wanted to thank you for what you did this week. Karen Henderson came to my door Thursday night, crying and asking if I would help her call a locksmith. I told her that maybe now she understands how it feels when someone takes your property without permission." But the message that really caught my attention was from a reporter at Channel 7 News. "Hi, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7. We received a tip about an HOA dispute in your neighborhood involving illegal parking and property rights. We would love to get your side of the story. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." When I got home, Sarah met me at the front door with a huge grin and a glass of wine. "Welcome back, honey. You missed quite a show." She handed me a manila envelope that had been left on our doorstep. Inside was a handwritten letter from Karen Henderson, not the usual typed, official HOA correspondence, but actual handwriting on personal stationery. "David, I apologize for the misunderstanding regarding parking arrangements. Upon further review of community policies, I realize that the emergency provision may have been misapplied in this situation. I would like to schedule a meeting to discuss a mutually acceptable resolution." It was signed simply Karen, with no title or official letterhead. "She hand-delivered that Friday evening," Sarah explained. "She looked terrible. I actually felt a little sorry for her." But the real story was what had happened in the neighborhood while I was away. According to Sarah, my week-long standoff with Karen had inspired other neighbors to finally speak up about years of HOA harassment and abuse. "Mrs. Chen started it," Sarah said. "Thursday afternoon, she knocked on every door on our street and asked people to meet at the community center Friday evening. 37 people showed up. The meeting had turned into a 3-hour session where neighbors shared their experiences with Karen's reign of terror. Stories came out that I had never heard before. The Williamses had been fined $300 for painting their front door blue instead of black, even though blue was listed as an approved color in the official guidelines. Sandra Lopez had been threatened with legal action for hanging prayer flags in her backyard, which Karen claimed violated the community's Christian character standards. Mike Thompson had been forced to remove a vegetable garden from his backyard because Karen said it looked agricultural and lowered property values. But the most damaging revelation came from Patricia Williams, who worked as a secretary for Prestige Property Management. She brought copies of internal emails showing that Karen had been changing HOA policies without board approval for over 2 years. The emergency parking provision was not the only thing she added, Patricia explained to the group. She has been rewriting community rules whenever they did not suit her personal preferences, then using the management company's letterhead to make them look official. By Saturday morning, Someone had created a Facebook group called Maple Grove Truth, where neighbors were sharing photos, documents, and stories about Karen's abuses. The group had grown to 87 members in less than 24 hours. More importantly, they had contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. Attorney Michael Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, had reviewed Karen's unauthorized policy changes and confirmed what I already suspected. Most of her actions over the past 2 years had been completely illegal. An HOA president cannot unilaterally change community bylaws, he explained in a video posted to the Facebook group. Board actions require votes, documentation, and member notification. What Mrs. Henderson has been doing constitutes fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Saturday evening, I attended an emergency community meeting that drew over 60 residents. People I had never seen before showed up with file folders full of documentation about Karen's harassment campaigns. The mood in the room was unlike anything I had experienced in our neighborhood. For 3 years, people had suffered in isolation, thinking they were the only ones being targeted. Now they realized they were part of a pattern of systematic abuse. Tom Rodriguez stood up and read a formal petition calling for Karen's immediate resignation from all HOA positions. It had already been signed by 43 households. We are also demanding a complete audit of HOA finances and a review of all policy changes made during Karen Henderson's tenure as president, he announced to enthusiastic applause. But the biggest surprise came when Marcus Henderson showed up at the meeting, looking nothing like the arrogant attorney who had threatened me in my driveway the week before. "I came to apologize," he said quietly. "I did not realize how far this situation had gone. Karen will be submitting her resignation letter to the management company on Monday morning." The room erupted in cheers and applause that lasted for several minutes. As I drove home that night, I realized that my simple plan to teach Karen a parking lesson had accidentally sparked a neighborhood revolution. Sometimes the smallest act of resistance can inspire others to find their own courage. But the best part was still to come. Sunday morning was the first peaceful day I had experienced in weeks. I woke up early, made coffee, and walked outside to check my garage one final time before opening it. The security cameras showed no activity overnight, no cars in my driveway, no camping equipment, no Karen Henderson trying to force her way into my private property. I changed the garage door code back to the original factory setting and pressed the remote. The door rolled up smoothly, revealing my empty garage exactly as it should be. My workbench was undisturbed. My tools hung neatly on the pegboard. The oil stain on the concrete floor looked like modern art compared to the chaos of the past month. Later that morning, a courier delivered an official envelope from Prestige Property Management. Inside was Karen Henderson's formal resignation letter, effective immediately, along with a memo announcing new elections for all HOA board positions. The resignation letter was brief and professional, with none of Karen's usual legal threats or condescending tone. She cited personal reasons for stepping down and thanked the community for the opportunity to serve. But the real victory came in the form of policy changes. The new interim board had already voted to suspend all of Karen's unauthorized rule modifications, pending a complete legal review. The emergency parking provision that had started this whole mess was the first policy to be permanently deleted. By Monday afternoon, Channel 7 News had aired a segment about HOA abuse in suburban communities, using our neighborhood as a case study. Jennifer Walsh interviewed several residents, including Mrs. Chen and Tom Rodriguez, about the impact of unchecked authority in homeowners associations. I declined to appear on camera, but I provided background information about property rights and the importance of community accountability. The story generated hundreds of comments from viewers sharing their own HOA horror stories. 3 weeks later, our community held its first contested election in 5 years. The three candidates who ran on platforms of transparency and resident rights won by overwhelming margins. Tom Rodriguez was elected as our new president, with Mrs. Chen as vice president and Mike Thompson as treasurer. The new board's first action was to establish a resident grievance committee and create a public process for all policy changes. They also hired attorney Michael Chen to conduct the financial audit that revealed Karen had spent over $8,000 in HOA funds on personal legal fees related to harassment complaints.